the purpose of this was really, we're really keen for people to meet each other if we can, and keep it quite informal rather than presentations as such. Although we do have a little bit to say, and you know, my name's Inga Heyman. I am the co-director of Scottish Centre for Law Enforcement and Public Health, and I had the pleasure of hosting the GLEPHA conference in Scotland in 2019, which was a joy. I'm not saying it sarcastically, it was a joy. I also been a board member of the Global Law Enforcement Public Health Association, and something that's been really, really integrated into the work of the board is, and you will have seen at a number of the conferences, is ensuring that citizens' voices are part of, you know, approaches to law enforcement and public health, that people are heard and valued in the development of services. And we've heard it so much today already, and you know, in the last few days, about how important that is, but also in research. And it's not just about people telling their story, it's far, far more than that. And so, you know, there's a number of events that have occurred in the last, at least the last 2, if not 3, GLEPHA conferences that have really drawn a focus onto people with lived experience. And I hate the word lived experience, but you know, it's not for me to decide what words are best, and I'd be really interested to see what delegates' thoughts are on that. But so this meeting, I'm going to call it meeting because it's, like I said, it's not a formal presentation. It was really around developing and establishing a network of people, citizens, across a whole wide range of law enforcement, public health, where the intersect is. So, you know, as Dee was just explaining there about people exposed to violence, people, mental health issues, all sorts of problems, you know, people work in the commercial sex industry, all different range of interfaces between public health and policing or law enforcement. And Chris and Jennifer are here because actually we had this initial conversations from, we had these initial conversations out of this, the mental health, law enforcement mental health special interest group, of which Chris and Jennifer are very strong members of the group. So we started speaking about, look, how can we make this a more inclusive and valued network of people across the whole of the law enforcement public health arena, and to start thinking about how that voice can be more solidly integrated into the conference, and you know, in practice when different agencies are developing organizations and the rest. So that is kind of how we've come to this conversation. I'm going to hand over now to Chris and Jennifer. Like I said, my role here has really just been from the association, but I'm also really excited about it, and it's something that we're really passionate about within the Scottish Centre for Law Enforcement and Public Health, that the voice is there. So people's voices are there. So I am actually going to be jumping out of this session a bit early, so my apologies for that, because I'm in a session just after this. So is Chris, by the way. But welcome everybody that's here, and I'm going to hand on to Chris and Jennifer.
Is there any way we can turn the mics on of everybody so they have the option of speaking?
So that will tend to come through the Q&A. So there are opportunities to do that. So the little button down the bottom that says Q&A, you can put questions in there, but we can hand over the mic to people at that point. So Chris, you'll be able to do that as convener. But also,
and if people raise their hand as well, I should see the hands raised.
And if there's sections in the chat, that would be great. Oh, there's
Maybe we could
let's
start with Chris and I introducing ourselves. Do you want to start, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to start. So yeah, my name's Chris White, and I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. So I live in Scotland. I work for a charity sector, not-for-profit sector mental health research organization, and have done for the last 10 years now. Before that, I worked for a different mental health organization. And before that, I had lots of experiences where I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals, in and out of police custody. I have issues, I have had issues with alcohol and substance misuse, along with a long-term mental health condition. So all of those kind of things meld together. But part of my job for the organization that I work in is around citizenship and participation. So we started having this conversation, or I started having this conversation with GLEPHA at the conference in Edinburgh 2 years ago, where, as we often know, if you come with a particular set of experiences, and there was a question around kind of, what language do we use? And it's complicated. I tend to try to expand on what I mean by lived experiences to groups, but also let groups define how they want to use language themselves, rather than having academics or services or you defining language, or just resorting to the easiest language that's around for people. I don't particularly like service user, because actually most of the services, most of the police services and emergency services and psychiatric services, I didn't have the choice to use in the way that I can choose which utility services I use. So, I tend to kind of expand on what I mean by lived experience and lived experiences. That I don't just have one identity. I'm not a mental health lived experience person. I've got substance abuse. I'm a parent. I work. I've got childhood traumas. I've got all this big meld there. So kind of really kind of wanting to have that discussion about how do we describe ourselves, but also how do we bring that into the work of GLEPHA. So that's kind of my reasons for being here. Jennifer, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, I'm coming to you from Toronto. I'm executive director of a service user run organization called the Empowerment Council in Toronto. We do systems level advocacy in mental health and addiction. So we're funded by the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, but we're independent of the center and take our direction entirely from our membership, which are all people who have at some point used mental health or addiction services. We do systemic advocacy in the justice system as well. We get standing at inquests. We get intervener status in cases before the Supreme Court. And so even though we're a tiny little organization, we've been able to have quite a national impact on the rights of people with mental health and addiction issues. So things like people having the right to receive disability supports if they have addictions but otherwise qualify, people having the right to refuse treatment, things of that nature. And we have been quite involved with Toronto Police Services. I'm co-chair of the Mental Health and Addiction Advisory Panel of Toronto Police Services, and we've been able to really make the service user voice salient when affecting change in the Toronto Police Service. I agree about terminology. There's no great term. I've used the term service user just because in the international literature, it seems to be easier to find if people are looking things up. But I agree, there's lots of people who don't use services, never voluntarily use services. I have even more of a problem with the term consumer, which sounds even more like an active choice of use. Lived experience is like, well, what other kind of experience is there? Some people are adopting neurodivergent, which is good in a way because trauma can affect your brain. But on the other hand, it also, that and mentally ill, I don't like because they imply a certain biological basis, which I think is greatly exaggerated, and also implies a need for medical solutions as the primary and pharmaceutical solutions as the primary response. I like MAD to a considerable extent, the same way I identify as queer as a way of taking back language that otherwise would attempt to label me to my disadvantage. It somehow, though, doesn't seem to capture, if people don't have, it seems to imply a certain relationship you have with reality at some points in time, which doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. So still looking for a good term. I have used the term psychiatric survivor as well, and sometimes still do. But that also gets such a knee-jerk negative reaction in some quarters that people don't listen to me after I say that term. So usually when I use a term, I then asterisk all other things. You know, this is not to say that all these other terms are lesser value. So we really wanted to have a dialogue when meeting with you today, and so we're wondering about people's experience of the Law Enforcement Public Health Conference and what you found in it so far, what you think of the sessions and how the sessions are conducted and chosen, and also if you have experience from your own perspective that you want to bring to our discussion today. I'll say, for example, one thing I found about the sessions is that, you know, there's not a lot of service user voice at the conference, and there seems to be quite a bit of sort of marketing of perspectives rather than looking at the pluses and values of different tools or different models. It's often more of a promotion of a particular tool or model. So it seems like a bit of a bias as well.
What I'm going to do, because there's been a couple of people who've made comments in the chat, I'm going to ask them if they want to come and say something, and feel free to say yes or no. I'm just going to kind of go through the couple of people first, but if anyone else wants to come in, if you drop me a message in the chat or raise your hand. Elliot, I'm going to see if you want to say anything to camera, so I'm going to give over to you. You are on mute, but you should be allowed to talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. And I have had the privilege of meeting Jennifer and chat, at least messaging with Inga recently, but I have not met everyone here. I am not someone with who's a service user or lived experience or whatever terminology. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I am with the Behavioral Health Foundation in Tennessee. It's just a nonprofit policy center to advance mental health. And we work with, in Tennessee, our group of individuals lived experiences called the Mental Health Consumers Association. And I know the terms vary wildly, but I'm here to really learn. I've just gotten such incredible value out of not just treating people in previous parts of my life, but talking with people with all different kinds of experiences and trying to understand them. And to answer your question posed to this group earlier, I'm not sure I see a ton of the lived experience perspective on the agenda and in the way that these sessions are implemented. I think a lot of it is, you know, from whether it's law enforcement or whether it's mental health providers or others or just public health folks, it's really kind of talking like, this is what we need to do, this works, this model is great. But I have not seen as much, though there was a presentation yesterday, and I'd have to go back and find it, that had these vignettes of real people who had shared their experience. And that to me is what is so powerful. So data and sharing of real stories and real experiences really helps us in advocacy and getting more of the good kind of treatment and services that we want. So I just want to thank you, and I'm here to learn from you.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks, Elliot.
Chris, I if you noticed in the Q&A, Suzanne Sharkey would like to speak.
Yeah. So I'll come back and answer a couple of those points later, Elliot, but let me allow Susan to come in. Hi, Susan. Suzanne, is it?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great, yeah. So I'm Suzanne Sharkey. I'm actually co-executive director of UK LEAP, which is Law Enforcement Action Partnership. I'm also, like, you know, when you say lived experience, we're all lived experience, but, you know, my journey is I was in the police force actively doing undercover police work, particularly to do with drugs. And I'm actually the other side of that, in long-term recovery from alcohol and drugs, been in and out of various places. So this year was the first year that I spoke on a panel, and what I get is that, or what I find frustrating with it, I would say, is that exactly like Jennifer said, there is a broad, I can't think of the word, you know, showing good practices here, there, what works, what doesn't work. And the thing I find frustrating, particularly from the law enforcement angle, is that how can I get my law enforcement, you know, I've done a lot of work in Scotland as well, with Police Scotland, to bring those practices to, you know, to them to actually listen to my, you know, I don't really care about my voice, you know, that's me, but, you know, all these people that I see that can benefit from these, you know, diversion schemes. We have a few in the UK, but it's, you know, the dilution of impact, you know, these can make such a huge difference in various countries. So, you know, it's what is, they're going to sit and listen, but what, you know, what we get from these systems that are broken, you know, the good practices that are brought in, from my experience, have always been grassroots, lived experience voices up, and we get the pressure from above because of the systems and institutes that they work in. So I find it's great that we have high-ranking law enforcement, but it's you know, lived experience that really can impact their work. And I just, you know, particularly with this one being online, how impactful that can be. So I don't know whether that's quite, so I find it quite, I'm finding it really frustrating. You know, yeah, it's really frustrating. And like stuff like this is what I love, is there's been a lot of being talked to, but not inclusion of, you know, and an opportunity for people to actually critically analyse what they're saying. So, you know, because they are so short. But I'll leave it there because I could go on and I don't want to take up too much time. Thank you.
Can I just say that, Suzanne, that's exactly why this network has come together, is to be, you know, to work as a group, to be able to have that voice and, you know, shape the conference as well. And, you know, I know that the GLEPHA board are really, it mightn't appear that there is a lot of voice in there, but I know in Edinburgh we certainly did. And, you know, I think one of the things I know Jennifer and Chris are really keen on doing is supporting people to present at the conference. And so in any shape or form that can be, or other people to you know, some people have never presented before, or some people are really, you know, really well equipped presenters. Maybe there's an opportunity there to support other people. But
if you'd like to give us your contact information, we'd love to have you stay in touch and help us develop on the voice of lived experience at the conference in the future. And I appreciate it. I understand everything that you had to say. The difficulty of getting police services to be responsive to our voice is, of course, huge. I'm actually just working on developing something in Toronto to try and spread through the country, because we've had such an ability to influence the Toronto Police Service. I want to sort of nail down some of the ways that we've been able to influence them. One way is by participating in inquests where people have died in interactions with police. and when people have died in mental health services, where they're sometimes involuntarily detained, and also how people are treated when police go on calls to people who have overdosed, and how they treat the people who are with them on the calls, all sorts of things like that. So perhaps we could continue to keep in touch and talk about that.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
gonna
I appreciate that.
I'm gonna open up. Dana is wanting to come in and say something, so I'm going to go to Dana and give everyone a chance to say something. And when we get towards the end, I'm going to give each of the three panelists 2 or 3 minutes just to kind of come back with any points that they have, if that works for folks. But Dana, I'm going to let you come on camera. Can you hear us, Dana? Hi, Dana. I think Dana is having a problem with microphones at the moment.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you now.
Beautiful. Hello, my name is Dana Owens, and I live in the United States. I work with a program, a nationally known program, LEAD, which is Law Enforcement Assistant Diversion. And I work at the national level, and I train case managers. And one of the things that I saw that the conference seemed to be missing is like that voice from the case managers who are boots on the ground, and how do they do that well? Because it feels like I see the models, I see the examples, how the models work at a high level, but it didn't filter down to the level of the one-on-one contact with participants. And I would love to figure out a way that that could be also a voice here, especially when it goes to really thinking about the people like myself who have had lived experiences and who are now training case managers, and really realizing that the case managers are the ones that are boots on the ground dealing with sometimes mental health issues, secondary trauma. How do they go through that process? And also, how do they continue to learn and get support in this community also? So as we move forward, that's the thing that I felt like was missing. I felt like there was a lot of high level models and theories and data and those kind of things. But I thought that the piece that was missing is the ones that have the day-to-day contact with some of our participants. That's all.
Thanks, Dana. And I've made a couple of notes on that as well. If anyone else is that there, we have 3 or 4 people who haven't said anything at this point. If they want to raise, if you want Madison, Mick, Nadia, and Robert, if any of you want to say anything, do you want to raise your hand?
Let me just, before we move on, say to Dana, I'm really glad to hear you're doing the education work and would love to hear more about it if you want to be in touch about that.
I'm not sure if people know how to raise hands, so I'm going to see if because Robert's put a couple of messages in. Robert, are you wanting to say anything at this point? Like I say, if anyone else. There you go, Robert.
Oh, you can hear me. Ah, hello. Thank you very much. I don't actually have anything to add. I mean, just so you know who I am, I'm a sign language interpreter, and my whole family are deaf, and that's how I became a sign language interpreter. And I'm just very aware of the experiences that deaf people have and the challenges that they have in accessing various public services. And so I'm glad that someone mentioned about how the diversity of voices is important, that that's represented. And a lot of my work that I do at Heriot-Watt University is about trying to make academia accessible, not just about finding research opportunities so that other people can take part in these discussions. But what I find is that deaf people have got too many battles out there that it's hard to find the people to get involved, but it's an important point that needed to be raised.
Robert, I work with Deafblind Scotland, yes, particularly where people who have any kind of sensory impairment come into contact with services out in public can be really, really challenging. And I think, you know, that might be a conversation that is worth having. And if you haven't got contacts with Deafblind Scotland, their chief exec is actually really, really good. She did come from the organization I work for, Mental Health Foundation. So she kind of has a really kind of broad understanding of some of the challenges as well.
We had a really...
Yeah, we do know. Thank
You're on mute, Robert. Not sure if you meant to be.
I just wanted to say thank you, but yes, I do know of Deafblind Scotland, and I agree, they're a fantastic organisation up here in Scotland.
Can I just
really
say,
Robert,
sorry, can I just say Robert's been very shy about what he actually does. He's also very well known by many of us. You'll often see Robert signing behind the First Minister in the COVID, and even the BBC on the Prime Minister. So you often see him. He did an amazing PhD working around deaf people, working around with the police. So thank you, Robert. I'm just going in there because you've done such an amazing amount of work in this space already. So
we had a really terrible one of the inquests I was involved with in Toronto of a man who was very hard of hearing and had some developmental disabilities. And he was brought down by police. They thought he was not responding to them telling him to do something. He ended up dying in the encounter. So yeah, it's really important to take every disability into account. And being deaf, which is not, there's no need to perceive being deaf as a disability, as I'm also aware. Sorry to use the overgeneralized language.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because so a lot of the stuff that I've been listening to at this conference around how we deal with people from different social backgrounds, and often when I listen to these talks, so for example, there was a presentation talking about the shooting in Boulder the other day, and that if the person carrying out the crime was black, the people were very confident that that person would have been shot by the police instead of arrested. And often when I think about, you know, if you add a deaf person, quite often that often happens to them. So for the police, if they are confronted by someone that's black, that's deaf, that's signing, that looks quite aggressive, you can understand how that they will take the risk averse approach. But also within the deaf community, mental health is quite high, the proportion in compared to the hearing community. And so you can see that where I'm going with this, where the kinds of issues that they have with accessing police services when many deaf people have mental health problems.
I want to move on a little, and no one else has got their hand up at the moment, so I kind of wanted to respond to some of the things that have come up, and then get Inga and Jennifer to kind of come up with any thoughts that they've had. but I took down three big notes there of where we might want to be looking. So one of the things that we want to be taking forward from this conference is how we start to plan for greater citizen involvement in the work of GLEPHA and future conferences. So firstly, there is an issue that happens with all conferences, and and all professional-led conferences, and it's the same with GLEPHA, and we've had to navigate this, and we will continue to navigate it and find a way forward of actually how do you make it so that people with a citizen background who are not attached to an organization, who don't have anyone who can pay their attendance fee and such, attend the conference, because generally we have to beg and bully our way in to events and get someone else to pay for us, and that's the same with this conference. There isn't an automatic kind of way. If someone's a student, they can get a student discount rate. If someone works for an organization, their organization can pay for them. But actually, most conferences have an access issue for citizen participation. So we need to address that. Elliot raised a point around, who do we want this to be open to? I personally, and this kind of comes back to a point that I think Suzanne made as well. My personal view is that we very much polarize things. We see people who access services over here and people who provide services in a different place. But actually, we need to be much better at coming together, at co-producing, at learning from everyone else, including, Dana was talking about, those people with feet on the ground, not the managers, not the planners, those case workers, looking at what their experience brings. But also, and Suzanne kind of touched on this, when we talk about people with lived experience, or we talk about service users, or talk about consumers, actually, quite a lot of those people who are providing our services may also fit that bill. So, I do some work with an international program in Chicago around addressing stigma. And one of the things that we recognize is actually, if you provide a service, if you are an early career academic, coming out and saying that you have any issues in your life can be really difficult because it's likely to affect your career. If a police officer coming out and saying, actually, I've got lived experience of substance abuse, of mental health problems, can be really difficult. But it also goes to create that them and us situation. So I think we need to be open to the fact that anyone at whatever level can be providing a service and have experiences themselves of trauma, and looking at how we create those safe spaces to bring those out. And in kind of moving forward in kind of what a special interest group would do, I personally wouldn't put any limits on who can and can't be part of such a group if they identify with the aims of a group. I don't know, Jennifer, have you got any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. First of all, I appreciate what you said about the access issue. I think that most conferences that I would like to attend are daunting in just the fee to attend the conference. And usually you can't submit a paper unless you pay to register at the conference. So as a result, you get very little contribution by people who are perhaps part of peer organizations that are small and have a teeny weeny budget. Like if I spent our money going to most conferences, we wouldn't be able to buy pizza for our board members. Like we're on a real shoestring. So I really think there should be accommodation and of people financially at conferences so the voice can be more inclusive. And as for sort of trauma survivors, people with lived experience, sort of only groups or not, I think there's a place for both. I think it's good to provide an opportunity for people to have a confidential conversation amongst others who are perhaps also trauma survivors. And also, because you were pointing out, Chris, people can fear the price that they will pay for, and realistically so sometimes, for being out as such. And so having a group of us only can feel safer that way. And also can be a consciousness raising experience. But I also think it's important to be inclusive of allies and to work together towards common goals. And I think that all marginalized groups benefit from the support of allies as well. So I think we should do both.
Inga, I know that you have to go and start the next session that I'm also a speaker at, but I'm gonna turn up fashionably late for that. Have you got any comments before you disappear off?
Well, not too late, please. No, and I think I just would really like to reiterate that, you know, I've been going to the LEPH conferences. This is my fifth conference, LEPH, and like I said, we've coordinated one. I can, you know, this is not the idea that the lived experience voice is not inclusive is, I think, is not a bit unfair because that's your experience, that is, but I can tell you really strongly that the board, it is something that we really want to happen. And I know that, you know, very, very frequently people with, you know, that didn't have were unable to pay for, you know, coming to the conference would get free members, would, you know, and we've granted that time and time and time and time again. So I know that that's probably your experience, but again, presenting papers, you won't be asked, you know, you can present a paper, but you don't need to unless it's accepted, you don't need to come to the conference. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to pay to, if that makes sense.
Yes.
First, it doesn't work that way around. And so I think, you know, the underpinning value of this group is so important to GLEPHA. And so if you feel that you've always got to push down door, can I say that you're knocking at a very open door here? And it's how you coordinate yourself, you know, this group. And like I said, I was just here from the perspective of the board and to give that voice as well. But how you coordinate, I mean, I think it's such an exciting opportunity, you know, for GLEPHA to have such a network, you know, and how you can not just influence the conference, but influence research, influence program development, and you know, it's much, I would love to see it being this really empowered group of people who can just be welcome at every single table. And that's, I don't know if that's a bit Mary Poppins and unrealistic, but I really hope that, you know, that would be my real wish, that that would be what it is for you. And how you coordinate yourself, what I would say would, just for sitting within GLEPHA, there are some, you know, that are reporting to the board around each special interest group. And that's, you know, that's just a governance perspective, because all associations need to have governance at some perspective, you know. So maybe need to think about that as well, how that looks, and think about the plans that you have. I'm just so excited at the plans that could be and what can be developed. It's wonderful. And as we said earlier on, it's not just, you know, Suzanne brought up, you know, around substance use, Robert from deaf community, mental health, but, you know, Dee was speaking earlier on about violence. It's such a broad area that I think the membership of this network could be such an exciting place to develop. So you know, I'm very happy to be around to help, you know, move things if I can from a governance perspective. Very happy to do any of that.
Thanks, Inga. I especially appreciate I especially appreciate the welcome we've had from the SIG mental health group. It's been really supportive.
Oh, but yeah, well, you're in it. You're
Yes,
fundamental to it. And I am going to go, but thank you so much. It was so lovely to meet everybody, and hopefully we'll be able to touch base again at another point during the conference. And if not, see us in person at the next one, in real person. That would be so lovely.
I'll see you shortly, Inga.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
So one of the things we would like to get from today is for those people who kind of want to be part of formulating a kind of lived experience network to feed into GLEPHA and its way forward, is for you to be able to contact us and kind of say, yes, you're in. And then we can start having some kind of longer term dialogue of, well, what does that actually look like? I don't know, the easiest way of doing that is probably dropping myself and Jennifer an email. So I'm going to pop
I posted my email address in the chat, so people are welcome to take it down and be in touch.
I'm just going to pop mine in as well.
Great.
And also that kind, you know, when we were thinking about how we were going to describe this group, we were conscious that lived experiences are much more than just kind of looking at a single issue like mental health and such. And actually, I struggle when my wife's Canadian, and I often work in the US. And part of the terminology of organizations in North America that I struggle with is that both the US and Canada have organizations about mental illness. In the UK, we dropped national organizations of mental illness at least a decade ago, because again, our experiences that affect our mental health are not necessarily about mental illness. If you face a disparity, an inequality, or you have a different disability, or you face certain traumas, then they have a mental health impact that is not in itself mental illness, but can still present some of those challenges that are there. So we want something that is broad and inclusive.
I'm totally on board with you there, Chris, and always try to oppose people using the term mental illness. I try to explain to people as saying that it was a term that originated in part to attempt to relieve people from being blamed for being in a distressed state of mind. So perhaps the intention was good. They're saying, well, like people can no more help that than they could if they had a physical illness. But then it became sort of reified into this biological basis for everything and a pharmaceutical solution for everything. And of course, there are things that can go wrong with your brain. It's part of the body. Something can happen. But trauma is so much more at the basis of most people's experience for having encounters with the mental health system, and often having substance use issues, that it also has been found to actually increase prejudice toward people because it's seen as more inherent to the individual and more difficult to change. It's like to police, I say, if you have the idea that nothing's going to fundamentally change that person's state of mind, then you're not going to make as much effort to influence how they're feeling and doing through their experience, including their experience with you. So it's important to understand that people, even people who might seem quite out of it, are not in crisis all of the time. There are things that influence what state of mind people are in within whatever range they commonly have. So yeah, I would really wish that the UK ethos in that regard would spread more to North America. There are such strong forced treatment lobbies in North America. Do you have that much of that in the UK, Chris?
No, we don't particularly have forced treatment lobbies. But again, I think part of that might actually be because about how our health services are set up as well. That our health services are not set up as a consumer industry in the way that they are in North America. We do have anti-psychiatry lobbies, the same as North America has as well. But you know, there will always be those challenges. I'm conscious of time, and Inga will be mad at me if I'm more than 10 minutes late to the meeting. I'm supposed to finish at 10 minutes to the hour. So I'm going to close, and if anyone else has any final comments, please just speak up.
I look forward to being in touch with all of you. I hope you stay in touch and we can influence GLEPHA in the future.
Could you take a minute to speak, possibly, this is Elliot again, on what terms do you all like better than terms like mental illness? And I know that, Jennifer, you went through some ideas earlier about service user versus consumer, et cetera. But, you know, it's really difficult here in the States when we have one of the the biggest grassroots advocacy organization has mental illness right in its name.
NAMI, yeah.
You know, I'm a clinician in mental health disorder. I feel like the word disorder itself is stigmatizing when used outside of clinical connotation. So I'm at a loss for, you know, how do we, you know, as someone who's going to be writing a lot about this and does write, you know, what's the best way to communicate this in a way that people understand?
I use the term mental health issues. It's not fabulous, but it's both, I find it both inclusive, and it doesn't make as many assumptions, because you can have a mental health issue partly because other people think you do, and that could be your main problem. You can have one that's very much rooted in experience, either lasting or temporary influence of experience. So that tends to be my go-to term.
Again, I tend, if I've got the space, if I'm writing something and I have words that a good word kind of count, I tend to kind of use people and then explain what I mean by that. People who have had experiences of, again, it's that kind of thing. There isn't an ideal language, Elliot. I have problems with the term issues, and that, you know, sometimes words don't translate across continents. So for me, in Europe, when I hear issues, I also see someone do quotation marks in head, so that it's not a very validating term. But by the same token, you know, I've done placements with NAMI, and I've done placements with Mental Health America, and I found them both really, really challenging because of some of the language that they used was alien to me.
Yeah, when it comes to talking about people, with my organization, we started using service users, both because it seems to be broadly recognized, but also because we particularly represent people who have used services, because that's kind of where our organization is rooted, adjacent to a service. So it's kind of situational as well. I also prefer to use longer terms, as you're saying, Chris. You know, people who have experience of such and such issues is kind of a vague, sometimes blamey term. So it's not great either. It's just the only thing I managed to get by on a national level.
Yeah.
To switch out of illness, it seems like a slight step in the right direction.
So that's us at time. But we will be in touch with folks if you're happy for us to get in touch with us. But just a thank you from myself for coming along today.
Yes, thanks so much. It's been a great discussion and a chance to actually get to know new people at the conference, which otherwise it's difficult in the circumstances.
Okay, so chat to you all soon, and thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to dive off, Jennifer, and go into the next session.
Thanks for facilitating that, Chris. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you in your session.
Okay, bye.
Bye.